I'm going to do this hand gestures.
Good. That's perfect for an audio podcast as sign language. The day is still bright, but soon it will be dark. While day lingers, let's enjoy a nice walk. Perfect.
That was beautiful. That looked beautiful.
It did. You just have to take our word for it.
I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
And I'm Dennis Lim.
You're listening to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss the director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
If you're enjoying the show, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. Better still, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify. You can also find us at deepcutpod.com to find links to our socials, Discord, and Patreon.
Welcome to another edition in our ever-growing and probably never-ending series on the works of prolific Korean author Hong Sang-soo. And for this episode, we're discussing his 2022 feature, The Novelist film. If this is your first episode, we've previously covered Hong's other films, Woman on the Beach, which is episode 104, Night and Day, 105, and then also On the Beach at Night Alone and Yourself and Yours, which as of today have not come out yet, and they will. So the number is going to be like 110, 20, I'm not very sure. You'll find out. You can find them. And you can check all those out on our podcast feed.
And if you've listened to those other episodes, you'll know that we've been snowballing our appreciation for Hong's work, or perhaps that's me doing that and following in Wilson and Ben's previous snowballings. As a sort of climax of our series on Hong Sang-soo, we are really honored to welcome arguably the premier scholar and thinker on the director, Dennis Lim. Dennis, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you all.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Dennis is a writer and curator based in New York City. From 2013 to 2022, he served as the director of programming at Film at Lincoln Center, and he co-chaired the New Directors New Film Selection Committee. He co-founded the Art of the Real Festival and organized annual and recurring programs including print screen, projections, and retrospectives. And as artistic director of the New York Film Festival, he recently wrapped up work on this year's New York Film Festival, number 63. And if you want to hear our coverage of this year's festival, to which Eli very gratefully had a press pass, you can check out episode 111.
Alongside editing and or writing for publications such as The Village Voice, The New Yorker, The Los Angeles Times, Film Comment, and The New York Times, Dennis has written books on David Lynch and the director we are discussing today, Hong Sang-soo. Dennis's book on Hong's 2005 film Tale of Cinema is available to purchase at Fireflies Press. I have it right here. It is a great read. It is not that long of a read, and it was sort of a way for me to unlock more of Hong's cinema, personally, for me. We have previously talked about Dennis's writing on Hong, and he is the main reason why in all the episodes we've done on him, we've asked each other what shape we think his film is. So I think that is something that I definitely want to talk about as we dive into this discussion of the Novelist film.
Before we get into the Novelist film itself, Dennis, we want to ask you about your relationship to the works of Hong Sang-soo. If I'm correct, the first of his films to show in the New York Film Festival was On the Occasion of Remembering the Turning Gate in 1996, a full 13 years before you served on the selection committee, never mind being the artistic director. So what was your connection to Hong personally, and how did you handle inheriting New York Film Festival's existing relationship with him as an artist?
Well, it's a bit fuzzy in my recollection of it, but I think Turning Gate may have been the first Hong I saw. Or if it wasn't the first one, it was one of the first, even though it was his sixth film, something like that. Mm-hmm. Those films didn't necessarily show up in New York, the early ones. I might have seen one of them in Rotterdam in the early 2000s. Turning Gate was actually, what year? I think it was 2002, wasn't it?
2002. It is 2002.
It is 2002.
Oh, goodness.
Sorry, dates up, what is time? I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah. A question Hong likes.
Yeah. To get back to your question, I remember that the first time I met Hong was at the New York Film Festival. I was on the selection committee the year that we showed Oki's movie, which is still one of my favorite Hong films. And I did the Q&A with him then. So that was my first in-person encounter with director Hong. I started working at the festival in 2013 full-time, but I had been on the selection committee since 2009. Actually, in 2009, there was a Hong film that we didn't take. Nothing to do with me, I think. It was, I think it was Like You Know It All.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the few Hong films that was not included in the festival. And we showed many, but not every single Hong film between 2013 and I guess 2019. And then I've been overseeing the program since 2020, and we've shown, yeah, I guess it is true that we have shown every Hong film. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's 10 films, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah, so it is 10 films since 2020.
Yeah.
And he, it would have been more. He's really slowed down. He only had one this year.
He did.
That's slowing down for Hong. Actually, I'm curious because, I'm late into Hong. Like, I think my first Hong was Right Now, Wrong Then. And
that's a great first one, I would say.
And I was confused. I was extremely confused watching that because I really had zero context coming into it. And I think, especially now, like people, let's say younger cinephiles discovering Hong, it's like, oh, I'm entering a filmmaker who has a gigantic body of work. But when you first discovered Hong, that's like number 5 of 6, right? With Turning Gate. Like, what was the impression, I guess, of Hong as a filmmaker, considering that's like early in his career?
I think there were a few contexts in which he was being discussed. He had obviously been around since the second half of the 90s. So he was being discussed in terms of new Korean cinema, whatever that particular new wave was being called. First films by Lee Chang-dong and Bong Joon-ho also emerging in the mid-late 90s. And because he, I think, started showing up in Cannes, there was the usual sort of cinephilic reference points where, because the films were talky, because they were focused on interpersonal relationships, like, just the comparisons to Romer. The structural element was quite pronounced, I think, just in his play with narrative structure, even from his very atypical first film, which had this sort of 4-part structure. The Day a Pig fell into the well, and then I think The Power of Kangwon Province, which was his second feature. I remember reading some reviews. I can't remember where and when I saw that. I do know that around the time of Turning Gate, maybe right after, there was BAM in Brooklyn did like a sort of catch-up early retrospective of Hong's, and they showed everything up until that point. And that's when I saw everything from the beginning, I'm pretty sure. So those films they're recognizably the work of the same filmmaker. But if you go back and look at, Turning Gate versus What Does That Nature Say to You, they're quite different, just in terms of how they look, for one thing, is just quite different. It wasn't necessarily clear at that time that this really was one film, one project, like that this was a body of work that needed to be, optimally, I guess, should be encountered in its entirety. It was clear that he was a filmmaker who was unusually so, I think, for a narrative filmmaker, interested in structure and repetition. And there was the sense that, you would watch a Hong film, even at that early stage, sort of like clued in to certain tropes and even like in-jokes that would recur, the drinking scenes, the men behaving badly, which is, I think, probably more pronounced early in his career than it is now. I think he's moved on from that. But like the male characters being just absolute shits. Like,
yeah,
they're very evident in, let's say, in early Hong. I think those were maybe more dominant in sort of the Hong discourse. And I think this points to the evolution of his work. I think his concerns have evolved over time.
It's really interesting that you sort of describe Hong's films as one big project or one film, as you say. You talk about it in your book like they're all rooms in a big house and he's always sort of like renovating different rooms. I wonder if that's like an idea that you have, or is this something that like Hong sort of like sees of his own work, that they're all sort of part of like a ever-growing tapestry?
I'm not sure Hong thinks of his work in that way. I'm not sure how reflective he is or how willing he is to be reflective. I think I learned pretty early on, having attempted to do a Q&A with him for OP's movie in 2010, which is also the Hong film that features the most abject Q&A. He's not one for to reflect on larger meanings when it comes to his work. He's actually very open when he talks about concrete things, when he talks about process. He's very specific when he talks about how he makes a film. He finds an actor, he finds a location. He can be very informative when he's talking about how he makes the films. But what the films mean to him or in relation to other films is something that he doesn't really ever weigh in on. And even when he does, I just don't think they're that interesting. I think he's more interesting when he's talking about, like I said, concrete matters. But the idea of Hong, it's at a certain point becomes self-evident, right? This ever-expanding body of work that the films all relate to one another in some way. I don't think you can just watch one Hong film or even two and really get. It's cumulative. I think the effect is cumulative. You're either with it or you're not with it. And I get that some people may not be.
Benjamin?
Wait, what?
I was wondering. I mean, there's always, a group of people. You're not all gonna be on board with the Hong project.
I mean, I find Hong to be fascinating. I think I find that just watching his films, I do see this process-driven, less outcome-led process, which I find to be fascinating. And for me, it's actually better that I don't like all the Hong films, because when I like one of them, it's like, whoa, what's happening here that speaks to me? Because if I like them all equally, then it's kind of like, oh, they're all the same. But then here it's like, oh, for some reason, I really like this one. And that tells me more about me than it tells me about Hong. And I think that's what I appreciate about the films more so than anything.
Which ones do you like?
My favorite Hong is Yourself and Yours. And we have an episode on that. And I think it, for me, is the turning point of that kind of evolution from the men are shitheads and everything's bad to kind of a more optimistic kind of viewpoint, a slightly more female-centered sometimes perspective. And I think that turning point for me really is something that feels like a light bulb moment for me in a Hong sequence. And that's kind of why it speaks to me.
Even for Hong partisans, I don't think we like them all equally, or we certainly like them for different reasons. For me, what is interesting is that the variations still seem infinite, that there's still, he still has ways of surprising me. Even the last couple of films, I think there's been a reversion to early Hong, not necessarily in sensibility, but just in terms of the narratives are more straightforward. The films are more event driven, which they hadn't been for a while. So I think this ebb and flow is pretty interesting to follow.
Yeah, I was just saying to the guys, in What Does That Nature Say to You? He's cross-cutting. And when he cross-cut in that one scene, I got out of my chair and I was like, oh my God, holy shit. He's discovering cross-cutting.
He's D.W. Griffith here.
Yeah, pretty late in his career to be figuring that out. But, I do think that it's not fixed, right? Even though it's, as I said, it's all one film, but it's one constantly evolving project.
In the same sentence in your book where you use the word cumulative, you also call it unfixed, prismatic, and modular, his body of work. The word prismatic was jumping out to me as particularly useful. And I think it speaks to what you're saying about the minutia that change from movie to movie, that kind of ebb and flow accounts for that prismatic quality, where what you see through it in a way reflects back to you, per what Ben was saying.
Yeah, I think it also suggests the multiple paths that one can take through a Hong film. I mean, the body of work is so immense now, relatively speaking, that, and I think I write about this in the book too, and I wrestled with this in the course of programming a retrospective. What is the best way to encounter these films, to think about these films? Do you watch them chronologically? Obviously, over time, you can see his preoccupations, thematic and formal, evolve. But yeah, it's interesting to also group them in different ways, which is why when we did the retrospective, I did it as just a series of double bills, but doing a different pairing a film with a different one each time, just to suggest that they're different configurations. And I think this is a key to reading Hong too, is that these juxtapositions are telling, and there are different and multiple configurations in which one can think about the work.
Yeah, I have found that even if I don't click with one on first brush, another will help me unlock something in the one that I didn't appreciate initially. I totally agree with Ben that Yourself and Yours helped click a lot of things and chart the change in his fixations. Early on, Power of King One Province is one that I still love. It's a really lonely one.
In the interest of time, I would like us to actually enter the Novelist film. Maybe let's start with, because we've already covered a bunch of other Hong films, and based on what we had already covered, you picked this one to cover. What was your reason behind picking the Novelist film?
I guess there are a few reasons. It's probably a favorite. It sounds like you hadn't dealt with recent Hong based on your list, so I thought maybe it would be good to kind of situate us in the relative present, the recent past. It is probably one of my favorites of his recent films. Yeah, I guess I have a fondness for the films about filmmakers, and I think this is a very interesting filmmaker figure in that she isn't one and then decides to be one. And it was actually, I guess the book came out 3 years ago and I wrote it like 4 years ago. I was trying to write about every Hong film up until that point, and this was the last one I could see before my deadline. So the Novelist film was the last one that I sort of like just snuck in. I had already written most of the book and then got a screener before it premiered in Berlin, and then found it like a quite useful key in terms of unlocking. I mean, I just, sort of went back and looked, and I'd mentioned it in several different contexts in the book. So people often ask about a good, entry point Hong film. And I think this is one, for me.
Well, if it's one of your favorites, it's actually Wilson's favorite Hong film. So maybe, Wilson, you want to talk about why it is that case?
This is as of today, because for like the longest time, Claire's Camera, which is such a lovely picture and I think really light on its feet, really fun and breezy, and has that incredible Huppert performance with that incredible Kim Min-hee performance, like stood as my number one Hong film. But rewatching this today and like thinking about the first time I'd watched this, which was actually in Seoul at a very tumultuous time in my life, it provided me a lot of like clarity about my own life. But I sort of think of the Novelist film as this sort of Rosetta Stone of Hong as well, something to take in. And by watching it, you can really understand his body of work a lot more. And on top of that, understand his intentions or sort of like work as a director, because I feel like a lot of what Jun-hee is giving out, especially when it comes to the act of making a film, I feel like Hong sort of like feels similarly. There's a lot of talk about like not putting so much meaning into different things or approaching things with like not big plot points. And I feel like Hong approaches things in a similar way. But I think what really sells the Novelist film for me is that final sequence, that film within a film that we get a little bit of. And I remember sitting in the theater. It was just me and another friend watching this. It was just like an empty theater because it had been playing for months, and there are not many places in Seoul that were playing it with English subtitles. So I just found it, and we're sitting there. And when we get that sort of spoiler here,
spoilers from now on.
Spoilers from now on. But when we get that film within a film, and we have Hong like sort of speaking off screen, Kim Min-hee's basically saying to camera, saying to Hong himself, "Oh, like, are you gonna shoot it in color?" And he's like, "Yes." And she's singing sort of like that wedding song, and then boom, we get that like shots in color. Like, I was so taken aback, and like I like sort of had tears in my eyes. It was such an emotional moment that is sort of really indescribable for me, because I can't really place it. But as someone who had sort of been consuming Hong and sort of existing or living alongside Hong making movies for maybe 2 or 3 years at that point, it really worked for me emotionally. And yeah, I just found it to be a movie that had really stayed with me since 2022 when I saw it. Yeah, that's how I felt. Well, I'm going to ask Ben. Ben, what did you think of this film? This is your second time watching it as
Yeah, I
well.
was looking at my letterbox and I don't remember when was the first time I saw it. And I realized I watched it at the Singapore International Film Festival like in 2022. And so I did watch it when it kind of came out. And I remember watching it and being like, oh, this is pleasant. And like most of the time, a pleasant Hong is good enough for me. But it didn't really have like that sticking power that, because I remember when you watched it, you were like blown away by it, Wilson. And I was like, it was okay. But I think this time watching it, like I don't feel the same way you feel emotionally about it. But I think this time, zooming out from it rather than kind of going into it, like I felt like the themes that he was covering was like very interesting and I guess are kind of coming at me in a time where I was thinking about very similar things, because I think it deals with ideas of like creative burnout and the kinds of people that you want to surround yourself with. And I think it has that Romerian quality of like being open to life and like coincidence. And there's something about that I was like, oh yeah, this is actually a film about being open to life. And I was like, wait a minute, like, and I think I didn't really realize it at the time because I was just like, oh, they're just talking about stuff. But I think if I zoom out and like look at it as a whole, then I'm like, okay, this is actually a film about perspective on like how to live a life. And like, I think of the novelist and the actress that Kim Min-hee plays as kind of like two people in like different generations, but with very similar outlooks on life that happen to meet and therefore like form this very strong creative connection out of nowhere. And like, I think these types of connections, whether they are work related or romantically related or like friendship related, these things don't happen that often. I realize there's something kind of quite magical about what it's trying to do between these two characters, about that connection. And it helped to kind of like make sense of like what he's doing with this. And it kind of became more than just a pleasant Hong for me watching it again. It's maybe because it was refracting things I was thinking about in my personal life, literally today. Eli?
For me, I also really love this one a lot. I think, Ben, what you're describing about it being a film touching on how to live a life in community with other people makes me realize that I'm thinking of this as a little bit more focused of a version of Grass, which I also really like. The movie, though also just Grass itself. Where texturally that movie is Kim Min-hee bouncing off a lot of other people. This one has a little bit more thematic oomph to me. And I think it's partially because, per Dennis, what you said about, you know, the in-jokes and the references to other films, there are moments when the kind of crummy male characters threaten the narrative here. And Hong, as, you know, arguably his potential stand-ins, he winds up pushing those men aside and lets a different hypothetical female artist find her own distinct pathway to the same methodology that Hong uses. And I thought that was very interesting from a self-reflexive standpoint. I thought it was him challenging himself in a way that didn't feel as quite so self-flagellatory as some of his other movies can be. And agreed with Ben that ultimately it feels really hopeful and very sweet in a kind of simpler way than I feel like he sometimes allows for.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything. The film in which Hong's entire approach to filmmaking is dramatized. I mean, he actually, you know, has it all out there in terms of, I mean, it's not literal or direct, but like the idea that the novelist would make a film with what is available, with the people and places that surround her. That's very Hong, right? So, I mean, I think she is like interesting and unusual for this mouthpiece figure, this filmmaker alter ego, to be an older woman when it's usually been men of Hong's age or younger. And I love the idea that this is her first film and she's not a filmmaker and she's a novelist. And like, how might someone decide to make movies this way if they've never made movies? It's like maybe one way to think about it. And I think it grapples with this very fundamental question that I think the Hong Project poses, which is like, what is a film? What do you need to make a film? And in his his answer is like, not that much. I mean, it's just, it just requires you to maybe reframe your outlook of like what a film is or needs to be. And this relationship between art and life, how enmeshed they are, yeah, it's at the core of this film. It's what Hong is wrestling with in so many of his films. And agree with Wilson's read on the ending. I think if you're attuned to Hong in a certain way, this film will have an emotional impact. If you also know the Hong story, the idea that she's like sort of humming this like bridal, march.
Yeah.
That's obviously there's the whole backstory of their relationship, and that's something that carries over into the films, and obviously was dealt with in On the Beach at Night Alone. Always like sort of refracted in some way, but then clearly it's something that he's dealing with in the film. And the idea that this is something that could only happen in a film is also part of what makes it moving. And just the almost like primitive simplicity of like, I'm just going to switch up the color and you're going to feel something.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. That requires a certain nerve, I think, confidence. Like, I'm just going to, the effect of that is for me really powerful. For me, one of the pleasures of Hong is the actors. And I think the ensemble here is just great. I mean, it's just such a pleasure to watch them interact because of how the film is structured as this sort of like daisy chain of like coincidence, chance encounters. Like the run-ins, the interactions are really funny. And, there are people meeting for the first time, there are people with a history. Also, what I like about Hong is just how because he works with the same company of actors, like there are all these like traces of other roles, right? I mean, like, the actress played by Kwon Hye-young and Hye-young had this encounter of like, he was like the shitty filmmaker in front of your face too, right? So like there's always these ghostly traces of other films when you watch a Hong film. Like like I do like sometimes they literally are like, there's some characters who are actually like walking from one film to another, like just carried like in the background. But I just talked to Christian Petzold about this when he was at the festival too. Like you're working with the same actors and these actors bringing a certain memory of their other roles with them. And you as a viewer just register that as well. So all I wish is to say, I agree with what you all have said about this film.
Like, I'm sure like as a filmmaker, it also affects the way that you imagine the characters that the actors can play, because they have in your making of them into characters, like kind of become these people that in the making of it, they also contain those ghosts, whether you like it or not. And maybe they affect the way that you think about them as people because you've seen them so much. And with Hong, it's like with Kwon Hye-young was in so many of his films playing this like director character. It's like almost like always the same guy somehow for me.
Yeah.
We were talking about the ending. I was kind of curious what people thought about the kind of epilogue where she comes out of the theater, because that actually really unsettled me because I forgot all about it. And I was like, what's wrong? And I wrote that down. I was like, what's wrong? Like something's wrong to me, because I think Kim Min-hee exits that theater and there is a look on her face that just unsettled me. Like it was a dream that she just woke up from. And if we think of that color sequence as like this beautiful, sweet thing, then it is like waking up from a dream, at least for me.
Yeah, I want to tie that in, Ben, with Dennis, what you were saying a moment ago, that for all the actors in his filmography who carry ghostly traces, needless to say, the one with the most baggage film to film would be Kim Min-hee because of their real life relationship and the tumult that it's caused. I was thinking as you were speaking, Dennis, that this is finally the movie where it both touches on Kim Min-hee's present as being effectively an actress in partially forced, partially chosen exile, and allows her to move past it a little bit with this new friendship and this new creation of work outside of the context of just working with a Hong analog, kind of. But then in the end, she is in this very directly Hong filmed and Hong acousmatic voiced short at the end. And then, Ben, to your point, it comes back to the reality of the diegesis in the Novelist film, that it's black and white, it's static. To me, it like just puts a little wrinkle in the fabric to end the movie, where you feel the joy and maybe you come away thinking about it a little bit more because there's this little fray of the string at the end that like I'm still kind of grappling with it because it is unresolved.
I mean, if I read it in a certain way, it's like, okay, here's the dream of me being in this beautiful relationship with Kim Min-hee, and the fear, the insecurity of Hong of like, what if she wakes up from this dream? And that is what I get from it. It's like, it's actually, that scene is not about Kim Min-hee, it's about Hong. And he's like, what if she wakes up and she doesn't love me anymore? That's what I get from that. But I might just be reading into it because I'm just like in that space right now in my head. But like, yeah.
I think that holds water. And also it being technically a post-credits sequence means that, you know, at any moment, Nick Fury could walk out and tell her that he's assembling a team.
Well, I mean, you know, films are there to be read into. I think that's certainly a valid read on it. I think it's an odd and fascinating sequence too. It's very un-Hong, I think, to do something like this. You know, it just to have like a post-credits epilogue. I do think it's just a means of complicating the ending. It might have been too sweet to end with the film within the film. And I think to just have a note of ambiguity, she's almost like looking at the camera when she walks out of the cinema, I think. You know, there's this like direct confrontation. And then to end with the empty, I think the last shot is this empty corridor. It's just a nice sort of open punctuation for me, and which I think can be interpreted in different ways.
Yeah, there are like a bunch of question marks that like I leave the film with, right? Because Jun-hee, the novelist or the filmmaker, is so adamant in returning back to Kil-soo. When she finishes, she sets an alarm that ends 5 minutes before. So the expectation is that they're there, but the fact that they're gone is a big question mark to me as well. On top of like this sort of like faceless husband that Kil-soo talks about throughout the film, who I'm assuming is maybe sort of the voice behind the camera might be sort of what the husband is. And who is the Hong stand-in here? Like, is Hong sort of just putting himself in multiple different roles, the poet, the director Park, the novelist, and the husband? Like, it is very complicated in this very like cool way that they're all like surrounding Kim Min-hee's character, but they all have traces of Hong himself.
Yeah, I think the off-screen husband is a fascinating device. But also, let's not forget the other off-screen element, which is, at a certain point, they mentioned this film being like 47 minutes. And how much of it do we actually get to see? I mean, what else is the Novelist's film? You know, like, what else does this film consist of?
I mean, when you say that, like, there was a thought I had when, like, we see that sequence where it goes from black and white to color. And I was like, to be honest, he is using no cinematic tool to tell you that this is actually the film that we are watching. Except for the fact that it comes between her going to the cinema and then coming out of the cinema. Like, as far as we know, this could be something else entirely. And we have no idea because it's not like, oh, I see it screening on the screen, so therefore it must be that. And to me, that's kind of that Hong slipperiness that he does sometimes, where it's like, I'm not going to give you enough to really like concretize what I'm showing you. So then I'm like, yeah, what if this is nothing? Like, what if this is just not the film?
That's entirely possible. And also rewatching it, I realized that you never see her decide to make a film. It happens when they're in the bathroom. You know, she comes out and has like a whole theory of filmmaking already worked out about like how she wants to make this film. So I do think there's like some pretty like effective and playful use of the off-screen.
And a really also playful and, to borrow Ben's language, kind of slippery movement in terms of whose perspective you are closest to. In those early scenes, what often motivates the cut to the next scene is Jun-hee's glance. So she'll be looking up at the tower, and then we'll cut to her inside the tower. She'll be looking through Director Park's binoculars down at the park, and then suddenly we're down on the ground in the park with them. But that starts to slip away kind of around the point that you mentioned, Dennis, when all of a sudden we're with the nephew outside the restroom and the two women walk out and announce that they're going to make this film. It slips away from Jun-hee in a way that I'm still kind of wrapping my head around.
You know, it is interesting that these films that seem so casual contain all these odd and inexplicable moments often. I mean, I think Hong relies on this. I think
Yeah.
the idea of something unreadable, something open. I mean, he's very good at just throwing in something that like stymies you and disrupts that ease and comfort of like, being in a Hong film. That that there's like a certain mood and environment that's always established. But then there's always, not always, but often, I think in the films I like just something that sticks with you that you can't explain away so easily. I mean, some of these formal choices, the ending, the scene in the restaurant with the girl looking in the window.
Yes.
Is another, sort of lovely moment. What exactly is she looking at? And, and then she comes back. And yeah, so there are these moments that I think he's quite good at conjuring or adding to what seem like very simple situations.
I think the trick is that they're so structural. Even thinking about that moment with the girl, it plays out over one static frame. There's none of his zooming, where it's just the two women at the table, the child in the background leaves, returns, and then Kim Min-hee gets up and goes outside and has a conversation that you can't hear with the child. That it plays out so simply and structurally makes you think that it should be legible.
Yeah.
Or there should be something concrete in there. He holds that at an arm's distance and makes it unreadable in a way that is so crunchy to me. Like it's frustrating in a way that is kind of fun. And it makes me remember the composition of the child between them.
And even speaking in terms of like perspective, like you were saying earlier, Eli, like earlier in that scene itself, Kim Min-hee Gil-soo gets a phone call and we hear the other end of the line. So we're sort of like tuned into her perspective. But then when she moves outside of the restaurant, we don't hear the audio of what she's talking with the child. So that is also in it of itself like a contrast where when are we let in? When are we not let in?
What's funny about the girl is that, like, when we're talking about it, I realize something. The way I kind of look at it is that I feel like I am the little girl because it's like she's reflecting, she's diametrically opposite to me. So she's watching them from the outside. So then it's kind of like she's reflecting me because she's the audience in their conversation. And then it feels like it's kind of nice that Kim Min-hee's talking to me.
Ben, this is just like the moment we talked about in Woman on the Beach with the window cleaner outside the hotel room. I think you specifically said that it's like he's watching the scene play out from the other side, like the theater in the round.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting echo. Yeah.
I mean, I always like the curious stuff. Like, I think Hong, as his style has become more and more like less, and the more almost, you could say, realistic it looks, I feel like he's never been more dream logic, if anything. Like, I think that's why his films have this slippery nature, because even though they seem like they operate in the real world, they have a very strong internal dream logic that only Hong seems to understand. And I think that's why they're interesting to ponder and think about and like ask questions. And that's why they have these things that stymie us and confuse us, because he doesn't tell us what he's doing. He's just doing it. He's led by something. We just don't know what the thing is, but we can guess. But all we can do is guess.
On its face, it seems like it should be straightforward, but it is never.
Yeah.
Dennis, I don't want to like end the episode without asking you about shapes and sort of like how you see the shape of the Novelist film, because I feel like with other Hong films, especially his older ones where you have this sort of doubling, you have a more clearer form of like a structure or a shape to it, sort of a mirror image that we have. But with something like the Novelist film, I can't really sort of place a shape to it. Could you, or do you know sort of what Hong shape this movie is to you or to him? I don't know.
Yeah, well, obviously this is one of the film within a film films, as Tale of Cinema is, right? So it does contain a fragment of a film. I guess when I think of the shape of this film, I think of like a daisy chain of connections that seems to be, this like, it's a series of encounters, one leading to another. And there's also a bit of a circular moment where she is led back to the bookstore by Kim Min-hee to this woman that they both have connections with, and yet another absurd coincidence in like a day full of them. Yeah, so I think the shapes have become sort of looser over the years and some of the early films are very clearly like two parts that interlock in a very particular way, or 3-4 parts. There's definitely a sense that it's a film premised on the relationship between the novelist and the actress does take center stage, but like the connections that lead up to it and then spiral out from it. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers it, but I think maybe the chain is the shape here.
I drew a shape.
Show us.
Let's see it.
I don't know if you can see it. You gotta, my video is flipped, so I don't know if it makes sense. You gotta read it from right to left.
Yeah.
I drew the small circle after because I was like, it looks too much like a bra. So, so if I can describe what I drew, it's like two big circles and then a small circle on the right. But I didn't actually draw them as circles. I drew them as like opposing sine waves.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Rather, they're not two circles. They're actually opposing sine waves. If you imagine like the novelist and the actress as each sine wave, and then they meet in the middle, and then they kind of come apart, and then there's a little small circle, which is its own universe at the end of it. Anyway, yeah.
I love that.
I've drawn shapes for every episode.
I see it like this.
What am I looking at?
Oh, it's an upside down semicircle with a little swoop and a parallel shorter swoop at the top.
We're really getting kind of crazy with our shapes.
This is perfect for a podcast, of course.
I do like you talking about this in connection with In Front of Your Face, because it sort of like comes right after In Front of Your Face. And one thing that really stood out to me when watching In Front of Your Face for the first time is sort of Lee Hye-young's performance in it. And I love, she sort of has this Kim Min-hee-esque quality where you're so unsure of what she's going to do on screen next. And she just has this sort of explosive nature to her. And you really see it come out in this film, especially when she's interacting with director Park. And I found those to be the like funniest moments, because you can see in her face when she's starting to get ticked off by him. And then like at some moments she just explodes. Like in that first scene when they're together, she's like, "Why did you hide from me?" And like sort of like directs it at him. Or that sort of foreshot in the park where she sort of like shouts at him. And I just love what sort of quality she brings to this film, and it has become really such a, like a staple in like current Hong work, but she's such an asset to him. And like I think that is like her own thing that she brings to it, like alongside the direction, but this sort of unexpected quality to her performance really fills out that world a lot.
I think she's an incredible screen presence. And I do love that scene in the parking lot where she, and I think of what you were saying, Eli, like earlier about, she essentially just banishes that male filmmaker from the film. She just like kicks him out of the film at that moment. She's like, enough of that, but that's also the moment where she is bringing up this public perception of Kim Min-hee as this, figure in exile, and very directly confronting it and talking about like, what does it mean to say she's wasting her life? Like, waste of what? And who gets to decide what a waste is? And what does that even mean? But I do think there's a particular kind of actor who works well in Hong. Like, they obviously need to be attuned to his process, but also there's a quickness that I think is required to work this way, and a sensibility, a sense of humor, even a very different role from the one she plays in Front of Your Face. But yeah, I do like how you described it, Wilson, this sort of, unpredictability, almost like volatility to her character.
Because I think she's very good at being very still and then suddenly flying off the handle. Like if I look at her just like vaping, she's not moving a lot. But then when she does like have an emotional reaction, it's a very sudden, like kind of violent thing almost. Even in like the drinking scene, when the man, the poet, is trying to like come up with an idea, then like she suddenly becomes much more animated, has to like physically stop him from speaking in a way, and it has to like kind of take up space. And there's something quite physical about the way that she acts in that sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Even when she, in that same scene, it's clear that Kim Min-hee, Kil-soo, is bothering her at points too. And like what she does with her body there, and that she doesn't have those classic gloves on during that scene, making me realize that there's more friction between those two new friends as the movie goes on, to the point that they're not in the same frame for the final shot.
The Kim Min-hee point, I do think that this film, you can look at Hong's films as having overlapping chapters. And the Kim Min-hee chapter, like that begins with Right Now, Wrong Then, becomes very literal in On the Beach at Night Alone. I think reaches a nice sort of punctuation point with the Novelist's film. And I think the films that Hong goes on to make after that, it's hard to generalize because he's one of these people who will always just do you think he's in a particular mode and then he'll do something else always. But I do think there's an interest in just generational relationships, like between parents and children, seem to be something that he's working through. Right now, I think the film that followed the Novelist film was Walk Up, which is one that, that is quite clearly on his mind up until What Does Nature Say to You, most recently. And of course, if you want to look at, just biographical stuff, which I reluctant to rely on too much, but Hong obviously invites it, given the kinds of films he makes. He's, as of this year, a new father again. He has a grown child who has been affected by his separation and relationship with Kim Min-hee. So all of that is sort of, I think there. Yeah, it's interesting to see, the younger actors who have come into the fold as well, the roles they play here, and then they will go on to play in the films he's made since. Because there's quite a few, like 8. How many has he made since the Novelist film? I mean, which is a film from only 3 years ago, and I think he's made 7 films since then or something.
6 or 7, I think.
Yeah, 6. Yeah, 6 or 7.
Yeah. I don't know whether this is his first appearance, but the guy that plays Kyung-woo,
Hye-young, my guy.
New favorite Hong. I don't know.
He's great.
Standby.
He's just really
fantastic.
great.
Yeah.
He's so good in Traveler's Needs.
Yeah.
Yes.
He has a doofus quality, which I really like. I just find him somewhat funny to look at. And he kind of really leans into it, especially for, I think, A Traveler's Needs.
And his crazy stash in the new one is and everyone talking about the damn mustache. It's so funny. It's so funny.
I kind of want to loop back onto that conversation you brought up, Dennis, about waste and when they talk about Kil-soo's potential as an actress and how much of a waste it is. And I thought watching it this time, it really locked in for me, how important it was to have that director plus his wife scenes, because they do get kicked out of the film. And in a way, they're not important to the creative collaboration that happens between the actress and the novelist. But I think they form a very interesting counterpoint to, in a sense, the purity of the collaboration there. Because there's a very transactional quality to the way that the director talks about projects and about past projects. He talks about funding and stuff like that. And something about that. And then I think that kind of conversation about waste is about what kind of career you could have had and how you could have succeeded, rather than say whether you like making films or whether you like acting in films. And I really didn't clock this the first time, but it's very much a conversation about kind of economic value versus the value of art making itself for its own pleasures, which I think both the actors and the novelist kind of represent. And they live that kind of life as more of an artistic kind of urge rather than a economic / labor urge. And I found that to be much more instructive this time, and really kind of, maybe because these are conversations that I've been having a lot more often as well. So it really kind of reflected a lot of what I was seeing around me, people also doing creative burnout and finding it difficult to use their creativity or the artistic tools for making money and making ends meet, and how much it corrupts the artistic process. So I think being able to really zoom out and see all these pieces that he's placing, it really, I think the novelist really creates a very complete picture about maybe an ethos towards his art, I would say, if anything.
I agree with that. I think that couple serves that function. But it's a very literal film for Hong. I mean, there's just it's very direct. And earlier I said, this film is about what do you need to make a film? But also this question, why make a film? Or why write in the case of the novelist? I think very telling are also the conversations where she talks about why she's stopped writing. She could continue to write, but she feels a certain kind of, I think she's wrestling with this question of why one creates, and she talks, I like the scene where she talks about, where she's trying to explain to Min-hee's character how she detects a certain kind of fakery in writing a certain way, creating, inflating things, or creating meaning when there isn't one, forcing things. So yeah, obviously people are forced to create and to make work because that's how they make money, and that is how they retain relevance in a capitalist world and art form. Yeah, I think Hong's entire practice is a challenge to that, and I think it's very much in this. I mean, you see all these people who've given up creative pursuits for various reasons. Even the bookstore owner falls into that category too, right? I mean, she's an old friend who stepped away from writing for like a different kind of life. So that is something that's, woven through the ensemble.
I haven't like a sort of tangential question to that. So speaking of that sort of practice that Hong is doing, you do talk about it in the book as well. And it is like sort of your role as someone that works in programming, as sort of someone that is integral to sort of keeping Hong relevant to filmgoers around the world these days. Like, how do you feel like you fit into this picture of Hong continuing to make films and supporting him in sort of like a film festival context?
He's done the numbers. He's figured out like what it takes to make another film, which is like, you sell a film and then you have enough to live and make the next one. And so it goes until that changes. And who knows, it might. I'm not saying everybody should do this or should work like Hong, but I do think that because he works this way, it just calls attention to how much we are forced to accept as the film industry and the film business and the film culture. Like, films have to cost a certain amount, they have to be made a certain way, and they have to move through certain channels. And I think just the idea that one could do it differently. I find Hong a really useful model for young filmmakers, independent filmmakers, film students. Like, the point is not to make a Hong film or to mimic his process necessarily, but what can you do to resist certain constraints, whether they're formal constraints or economic ones. So yeah, I guess in terms of, I'm not sure if I answered your question, Wilson, but there's an audience for Hong it's not an enormous audience, but there's an audience in New York, certainly. And he doesn't have like a guaranteed spot every time he has a film, but I just happen to work with people who also think he's important and interesting. And so we do have a discussion and we invariably decide to invite the films. I do love that, he doesn't travel much. He typically only goes to like where the film premieres and then doesn't do any other festival travel. And I do like that he sends a little video every year expanding his filmography with these little like 1-minute films. I don't know if you saw this year's, Eli, that we showed at the festival.
I didn't catch it, no.
It's called Tree Above Volvo, and it's a shot of a tree above a Volvo. And I like that. It's a little one-offs that he does. But the festival circuit is important, but there is clearly not to all tastes. I think some people want other things from films. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with what he gives us.
Hopefully this doesn't land as too ham-fisted, but so much of what you just said, Dennis, ties back into the Novelist film itself. The art making as quiet little act of resistance and challenging capitalist pressures, or even pressures around what it means to work in a particular medium or be a woman or what you consider a story to be. And also the necessity of surrounding yourself with people who find that kind of pursuit interesting and important. Those are very much so on the mind of this movie.
Yeah, I think so too. And also this idea of art making as a practice, a daily practice. Like, what if you just think of it as something you do like yoga or something, like that's, and I think that's why Hong makes films, because it is a daily practice for him. He's just he's thinking in those terms. He's going to pick up a camera. And I think not everybody has the temperament or talent to work that way, but it's just a useful model because it's so clearly removed from the various structures and systems that are filmmaking today.
Dennis, do you have any last words to say on the film or Hong in general?
I think I've said too much on
Disagree in your life or the episode.
Yeah, no. You guys did a really nice job, I think, teasing out why this is, I think, a pretty significant Hong movie.
Is there anything that you want to point our listeners towards online or
Hong related? No, I don't know. No, I don't
or
think
are
so.
you related?
Anything
You know,
else?
any
Anything else?
No, definitely not. No, nothing. No, I don't think so. I'll let you guys do the pointing.
copy?
I know this is fun. It's always nice to talk about Hong with people who've clearly thought about him at length.
Well, likewise, and really thank you for taking the time to speak with us. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a great honor, honestly.
Yes, it really, really has. I feel like for all three of us, even though Ben and I are not in New York anymore, we all sort of like regard Lincoln Center as a cinematic home or like a sort of
Absolutely.
cathedral of sorts in the world. And I think a lot of that has to do with the programming that you've done for the festival and also for Lincoln Center. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Deep Cut. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. A great way to support us is to leave a review or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify. If you want to chat with us and other fans of Deep Cut, come join our Discord server where we talk about movies, TV, music, and share what we're up to. We also have a Patreon if you'd like to support us with a monthly subscription. Thank you to all our Patreon supporters, and very special thanks to our Patreon Deep Cut Pick supporters, Leah Lai and Nicholas Gao. You can keep up with Deep Cut on Instagram, Letterboxd, and X at Deep Cut Pod. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find links to everything we've mentioned here. Deep Cut is hosted and produced by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. Our cover art is designed by Justina Yam, and our theme song is composed by myself.
I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
And I'm Dennis. Thanks for having me.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.